I would like to encourage you to participate in this debate. So I'm going to give them both the chance to give a few minutes for the case for the euro. In other words, it's not doomed to failure, which is Oren's position. And the doom-monger Okamura on my left is going to then, he's going to have the chance to, he's gone second. We had a debate for several months about who was going to go first and second, but Ken won it. So he's going to go second. And then we'll take it a little bit from there. And it's completely freestyle. We've never done this before, actually, so we don't know quite how it's going to work out, but feel free to chip in. I only want one sort of piece of data from you, which is, and I realise that this question is a bit like an Oxford entrance question. You could equally well come back at various questions to me, like over what time frame, what do you mean by doomed, does doom mean the same as somebody leaving? But leave that aside. If you're having those thoughts, they're good thoughts. You're our sort of people. But I'm going to ask for a show of hands at this stage for the very simple question. You interpret it the way you think you can interpret it. So I'm going to ask you, is it doomed or isn't it doomed? And in good Oxford debate tradition, we're then going to do the same at the end. And that way we will see which of my colleagues won, since that's very important. So, who thinks the euro is doomed to failure? Hands up. Okay. Who thinks it's not doomed to failure? Okay, so there's a majority. I take that as a majority in favour of not doomed. Oren, it's yours to lose.
I'm surprised by this show of hands. If you asked a group of professional economists, I guess that at least it would be even, with very, very serious concerns about the euro. So I actually thought that I'm defending the weak side, but let me start by defining the territory that I'm going to defend. So the first thing I would like to say is that I'm defending the euro currency. I'm not defending the euro area. I'm not defending a political union within the countries that use the euro as a currency. I'm just talking about whether the currency, the euro currency, is doomed to fail or not. The second thing that I would like to say is that I understand the question as, can the euro survive, and not would the euro survive? So obviously bad policy can destroy almost anything, including the euro. There's no doubt about it. But I would like to argue that the euro can survive if, by the way, it can survive and it should survive if all the parties involved understand that we are talking about a currency and a currency only. Now, currency is an important thing, but it's not everything. And as we start classes in macroeconomics about the role of money, we say money is a store of value, money is a unit of account, money is a means of payment. And if you think narrowly about these functions, I think that the euro does them quite well. Namely, it's easier to transact across euro countries. The whole mess of, in the old days, we used to go from London to Paris. You needed to stock up pounds, and you needed to stock up Belgian francs, and you needed to stock up perhaps guilders, and then French francs. Transactions in the euro area are much more convenient. And that's roughly what the euro is supposed to do. It can do it. What can fail the euro if the euro is taken to be more than it is, namely either an instrument or facilitator of political union, because as you all know, there is no agreement, neither professional economic nor political, about the level of integration, political integration, that the euro countries would like to have. And therefore, if the euro is pushed as a facilitator of political integration, it will face all sorts of objections and problems. Like, some people will think that it is not doing a good enough job in promoting integration. Some think that it is too much of a threat to integration that they don't want. And these conflicts will destroy the euro. So to sum up my position, the euro as a currency can and should survive, provided that we understand that it's only a currency.
Okay, good. Thanks very much, Oren. Ken, over to you.
So, is the euro going to survive if there is only one country left actually using a currency called the euro? Clearly not. So we have to actually think about what we mean by the euro as a currency actually surviving. And I would suggest that a definition of failure would be perhaps that the euro area breaks into two, a soft and a hard euro. Basically, a hard euro around the core and a soft euro around the periphery. The reality is that the euro has always been doomed to failure. It doesn't meet the definition of what would be called an optimal currency area. To use one of the analogies in the macroeconomics class, each economy within the euro area suffers from different asymmetric shocks. So the potatoes in every one of these kind of economies tend to suffer from different shocks and different kind of diseases, perhaps. The problem with optimal currency areas is that if you don't have everything moving in sync, you end up with a monetary policy that is one size fits no one. So if we look back over the euro's history for the last 15 years, we find that either it has been too tight, which it was for Germany and much of the core in the first half of its life, and it was far too loose for the periphery. And in the second half, it's obviously been far too tight for the periphery and too loose for the core. Now, it is possible to overcome this level of asymmetric kind of economic shocks. And an example of this would be the United States, which obviously is an economy where you have very, very different levels of productivity, very, very different levels of wealth in different states, and it suffers from asymmetric shocks. The difference is that in America, labor mobility is very, very high. So a couple of years ago, we find that 3% of Americans had moved state in the past year. In the same period, in Europe, 0.2% of people had moved state. Fundamentally, we find that labor mobility is not actually the way that we overcome these asymmetric shocks. This means that you have to have the alternative, which is fiscal transfers. So although Oren says, well, we can have a currency, once you have the shock, you actually need to be able to overcome the fact that one fiscal policy is fitting all. And the way to do this in America is to have fiscal transfers. The scale of the fiscal transfers in the United States are on the order of between 10 and 15% for the poorest states of state GDP in terms of a transfer in, and payments on the order of about 5% of state GDP out by the richer states. In comparison, in the euro area, these numbers are transfers to the poorer states of less than 3% and contributions of less than 1% by the richer states. And I will put it to you that we've been running an experiment recently about what level of contributions people are willing to make, and clearly the Germans are unwilling to pay the Greeks 10% of GDP a year. For this reason, I believe it's doomed.
Thank you. Okay, so that's our opening remarks. I wanted to sort of kick off with a couple of questions, and then I will open it up to the way you want to take it. But Oren, in terms of the pure economics, because I want to get onto the politics in a minute, but the pure economics of this, do you think that the fundamental problem that you can have a common currency, within a common currency area, you can have fundamental divergences of productivity? Do you think that when people look at the euro, I think they see that happening over the last 10 years, And do you see that happening? And does it worry you?
Yeah, the theory that, Ken presented an extreme case of the theory that currency union requires labor mobility is originally due to an economist who won a Nobel Prize later on. His name is Bob Mundell. It's a theory that is usually thrown up, but I think it's fundamentally wrong. It's wrong theoretically because if we again stick to the narrow role of money, it is to serve as means of payment, and it has nothing to do with labor mobility. On a more practical level, if we think about what the euro really is, it is probably quite similar to how Europe was managed in the 19th century under the gold standard. Now, under the gold standard, labor mobility in the 19th century, labor mobility was quite low. Now, labor mobility can be a good thing. Most economists will say it is a good thing. Some people might think that it is not a good thing, but it is something separate from a currency union. We can have a currency union with labor mobility, without labor mobility, with convergence of productivity, without convergence of productivity, with transfers across states, and without transfers across states.
And how does it work? If I buy some of that, but if productivity growth is so different in different countries, doesn't that eventually doom it to failure?
No, because if productivity gets lower in one country, then probably the standard of living in this country is going to go down in terms of the euro. So people will earn less euros, companies will earn less, will be less profitable in terms of euro, but there's enough flexibility in the price system to accommodate such changes.
So you mean, in other words, that people in France and Greece have to have lower nominal wages?
In terms of euros, which they already have, just as people in England, in the north of England, tend to have lower nominal wages in pounds relative to London. I mean, that's something basic in the way any economic system works. The whole purpose of markets is to adjust and accommodate to these changes. And having a single currency is not an impediment to these adjustments. If anything, the opposite.
But then that does seem to imply that you could have permanently reducing wages in some countries that had permanently reducing.
Of course, as it might be the case that wages in the Midlands are already for probably 30, 40 years at least lower than in London, and they might stay lower than in London for the next 50 years. That's something completely feasible.
Right. Ken, did you want to come back on this? Because essentially I think Oren is saying that it doesn't, your case, the main point of your case sort of doesn't really, it's irrelevant.
I would point out that, so Oren is basically saying that we don't need labour mobility. All the Greeks can just stay inside Greece and they can all see their salaries reduce. And we've been trying this. And the reality is that youth unemployment is over 50%. Overall unemployment is on the order of 26%. I have to say, it's a huge sacrifice to make. GDP has fallen by 25%. It's a huge sacrifice to make to maintain a currency union.
So let's do the thought experiment and think about how much Greece would have been better had it left the euro. For sure, it would now have something like 25% inflation. Quite high inflation. Would it really have a better labor market? Would it be able to find jobs for all the people who are employed by the government that doesn't have any longer taxes to pay them? I don't see how leaving the euro is going to improve their situation. If you want to think about a concrete example, think about what happened in Argentina when Argentina went off the dollar in 2002 after its default. Poverty rate in Argentina, the rate of poverty in Argentina just after were 53%. 53% of Argentinians were living in poverty in a country which is actually quite a rich country in many respects. Was it the case that leaving the dollar helped them? No, it created inflation, created a huge mess in the financial system, didn't help them at all.
Can I go into the issue of fiscal transfers? Because because I think that you were putting forward the case, Oren, that you don't believe that fiscal transfers are necessary even for the euro.
Well, they're not
right?
necessary condition for the euro to survive. They might be a good thing on their own by themselves, right? If Europe wants to create some sort of a mutual fund to help countries in trouble, that might be a good idea. It can work with and without a common currency. It doesn't. The common currency, if anything, is facilitating these transfers rather than undermining them.
And so in your view, you could have a common currency and not a common fiscal policy?
I definitely yes. One of the problems, one of the things that put Greece into the current problem was the illusion that once it is a member of the euro, its fiscal policy is guaranteed and its bonds are absolutely safe, just as German bonds. That was a big mistake that somehow is originating in the confusion between the euro as a currency and the euro as a mechanism to discipline governments. That didn't work, and it was a huge mistake. In the future, we must make sure that if governments overborrow, the value of their debt is going to go down, the spreads are going to go up, and the markets will signal to everyone that these countries are close to default. If that has been the case, Greece should have defaulted 5 years ago, and maybe would not have defaulted at all, because the markets will realize much sooner than 5 years ago that it is about to default, and the banks would stop lending to it.
Ken, do you want to come back on this idea that you can sort of divorce the currency from most other things, which I think was not the point. I think that you were arguing a different point, that it was almost conditional upon having fiscal transfers.
Yes. So Oren's point is that essentially all the adjustments can be taken internally within the economy. The reality, I'm going to wander a little bit into the political realities, which is to say that countries, populations generally don't take very well to this idea that they should be forced to go through this type of adjustment by themselves. The idea, when countries had their own currencies, they could run different monetary policies. They could also run different fiscal policies. The issue here is that while it is theoretically possible that various parts of Europe will see lower and lower kind of wages, it's not a single country. Europe is not a single country. This idea that people in Greece are going to be willing to put up with this, and that labour mobility isn't an issue, and fiscal transfers aren't an issue, ignores the reality that people tend to get very upset about these things.
I wanted to end my question for the time being, and I'm going to throw it over to you just to check I understand this, Oren. That you said that labour mobility is not a requirement for this, which I think you made it very clearly. But it seems to me the implication of what you say is that labour mobility will go through the roof, because people in the unproductive countries, let's call it Greece, will increasingly, faced with the prospect of ever lowering nominal wages, that in euro terms their wages, they go into their employer and say, could you, I want to negotiate over my wage reduction for next year. Where are those guys going to go? And doesn't it then, the sort of, as it were, the real politique of your position then hits up against the sort of politics of Europe, which has not accepted the idea of unbridled immigration? Wouldn't your scheme lead to sort of equalization through large quantities of people moving?
Okay, so if you look at the statistics of which countries tend to export a lot of labor, they actually don't export them to countries within the same currency as they do. So if you look, I don't remember exactly how the league table looks like, but I think Moldavia, which is the poorest country in Europe, is the number one exporter of labor, probably to Germany or to Russia. Why do they migrate? They migrate because they are poor. They are poor whether their wages are calculated in euros or in dollars or in some sort of a crap currency that they have. They are poor, and because they are poor, they will do their best to move to richer countries where they can make a better living. Haiti is another country that has a huge amount of labor exports, that exporting a very substantial amount of labor. And Jordan is on the list because it has a rich neighbor, Saudi Arabia. So again, richness and poverty is not determined exclusively by the currency. And in theory, it is not determined at all. People are rich if they are very productive, if they can produce a lot of goods and services. And they are poor if they cannot do it. Now, the one point which I think that the weakest part of my argument, if I want to help Ken, is that indeed it is indeed the case that once countries are within a currency union, they lose a lot of flexibility on running monetary policy. But how important is monetary policy? I think that perhaps when I was trained as a macroeconomist, I was convinced that it is very important. I'm looking at the last 7 years of monetary policy in Europe. I'm not impressed. In Europe and in the rest of the world, what has monetary policy done for us? Has taken bad corporate debt and substituted by bad sovereign debt? I'm not impressed.
So would you be in favour of the UK joining the euro?
I would be in favour of the UK joining the euro. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Not just for this debating purpose?
Yeah, it will make my travel to Belgium much easier.
And the financial crisis would have been fine for us if we'd been in the euro.
The financial
led to an even bigger mess.
The financial crisis that we have is a result of the fact that we didn't regulate our banks properly, and that would be the case with or without the euro.
Okay.
We have regulated them badly in UK pounds, and
yeah.
Same thing for.
Give Ken a quick rejoinder on that, and then I'll open it up to you.
Right. Okay. So what is it that makes people more productive and richer, that actually makes people move to places? The answer is the institutional environment. The reason why Italy has a problem and that Greece has a problem is, let's look at where they are on the World Economic Forum's competitiveness ranking. So Germany is number 8. Italy is 49. It's sandwiched between Panama and Kazakhstan. It's 4 places higher than Russia. As for Greece, it's 81st. So the reason why these countries have a problem is the fact that their workforces are not as productive because the institutional environment isn't as good. And it's all very well to say that there is a lot of emigration outside a single currency area, that Haiti, Moldova export people. But within a single currency area, pressure is taken off from states that have suffered an asymmetric shock. In America, what happens? My American friends always say, well, you know, in America, when things go bad, you get in your truck, you get a U-Haul, and you move states. This is what happens. There's an oil boom. People move to Texas. They move to North Dakota. When the oil boom ends, they move somewhere else. This is how the economic adjustment takes place. In Europe, it's not taking place this way. And in order for things to change, you actually need to make countries more competitive. And the problem is, of course, that politically it turns out to be very, very difficult to undertake the types of reforms that are necessary, that would actually help ameliorate Oren's idea that everyone should just accept lower wages.